All right, 5 o'clock hour, we'll check in on the Cowboys at 5:30 with John Machota, theathletic.com. Ball's top 5 in less than an hour. But John Kurtz covers Kansas State and has been around the program and has done some stuff with K-State athletics with broadcast, but also YouTube creator on the Rise, a title he has as well, Power Cat Game Day, and does a podcast with Aaron Lockett on Kansas State as well. John, thanks for your time. Why is Kansas State playing as well as they are, and is it because they got that 3-game, I guess you could say, buzzsaw with the Oklahoma State, and Iowa State out of the way when they did, even though those are losses?
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head there. A big part of it, and the biggest piece of it to me, is simply that the schedule turned. And I think everybody kind of knew that going into the year, that was going to be a really rough 3-game stretch. Also, keep in mind, K-State played Oklahoma State, who now looks like perhaps the best team in the league without Skylar Thompson at quarterback. And that is the best defense in the league, arguably, right now as well. So that's not a situation that was ideal, far from it, in fact, for K-State and Stillwater at that point in time. So the schedule has lightened up, obviously, but I also think that the defense has improved a lot. If you're going to point to, okay, something beyond just the schedule, what has happened? Well, the defense has become a lot more confident and just played a lot better. They were not good at all in that 3-game stretch against Oklahoma State, and Iowa State to start the year. And it was like a light switch was flipped on in the second half of the Texas Tech game out in Lubbock that K-State frankly kind of stole. And Felix Anudike-Uzomah, who's been leading the nation in sacks for a good chunk of the year at defensive end, he made a monster play to force a safety against Texas Tech that really turned the game. And from that point on, K-State's defense has been pretty darn good. The offense, to be honest, when Skylar Thompson's been healthy, has been pretty consistent and has actually been a pretty effective and efficient offense throughout most of the year. But it was the defense that was really lagging behind there in that 3-game losing streak. And so you want to tangibly point to what's happened on the field while the schedule has kind of lessened up and taken off the vice grip that was there for the first 3 games of the Big 12 play. It is definitely the defense, and they're playing just with so much more confidence right now, which makes sense because Anudike-Uzomah has been a monster. And the guys on the back end, there were 4 transfers in the secondary that were playing regularly. And so I think it's taken them some time as well. So a lot of things you could point to there. But I do think, number one, glaringly obvious, it's just the opponents that they've been playing.
John, how do you feel these two teams match up against each other? I mean, side for side of the ball.
Yeah, I think it's a very intriguing matchup. The thing that will be difficult for K-State, I think, is that, Baylor just being a team that runs it really well and has a physical, hard-nosed defense, I think is a pretty tough matchup in general for K-State. So, we'll see. Again, it's going to be about the confidence of the defense. Where are they at? Can they actually take the step up now to one of the upper echelon teams in the league and be much better than they were back at the beginning of the year? I think that will be one of the key questions there. And is K-State ready to go up against a really, really physical back who obviously is leading the league in rushing right now? That will be a question that needs to be answered as well. Jaylen Warren, for instance, had a really good game against K-State back in Stillwater and played really well. So I think that part of the matchup will be tough. And then for K-State, can you continue to throw the ball? Deuce Vaughn, we know about Deuce. He's a great running back, and he's been awesome. But a lot of his production has come out of the backfield catching the football in addition to just running the ball. And they've actually been, I think the thing that's interesting about K-State this year, you think of them as being like a hard-nosed, ground-and-pound sort of offense. And with Skylar Thompson, before he got hurt at the beginning of this year, that was what he aided as well. He was a guy that ran the ball all the time and used his legs a lot. But since he got hurt, he had a non-contact knee injury. We thought he was going to be out for the year. He was not. He only missed a couple of weeks and came back. But that's been beat up enough that it's forced him to stay in the pocket. So he's not scrambling nearly as much. He's just looking to stay in the pocket and dump the ball down or throw it deep. And we've seen that really develop the K-State passing offense, which has been pretty good. But you wonder how well that will hold up against Baylor. And the other thing I would mention, too, is just K-State has been a lot better at taking care of the football in this winning streak. For instance, against West Virginia, if you talk about just being mistake-free, no turnovers, only 1 penalty the entire game, that was a big part of the recipe, is just not hurting yourself. So will you turn the ball over against, obviously, a very opportune Baylor defense? I think is something else that stands out and something that K-State will have to stay away from if they're going to have a shot to win.
So, John, you mentioned Felix Anudike-Uzomah a couple of times. I mean, what a freak show this guy is. I mean, he played a little bit last year as a true freshman, but now he's a true sophomore. And you look at it, 11 sacks through 10 games, number 2 in the country. 6 forced fumbles, including 4 in the last 3 games. That's number 1 in the country. 14 tackles for losses, number 8 in the country. I mean, good Lord, what an offseason he must have had. I mean, where has this come from? When did they kind of get an idea he would be capable of this? And why is he putting up such huge numbers this season?
It's a fascinating story. So Felix Anudike-Uzomah is pretty much like the quintessential kind of K-State story where he is a diamond in the rough big time. So he had a scholarship offer at one point in time late in his high school career to play at North Dakota State. That wound up getting pulled at the last minute because basically they recruited over him. He didn't decide in time. They took somebody else instead of him. And so a couple of days before signing day, his plan was to go attend the University of Missouri as a student, not even play football. Wow. And K-State decided at the very last minute that he was worthy of a scholarship, and they pulled him in. And I can remember last year, toward the end of the season, hearing some positive buzz about him. I don't think it was anything that people anticipated it would hit this hard, this fast, but there was definitely a buzz like, this kid's got a body. He's got the frame to do this. He was just really small in high school, and I know that's a fairly common refrain for a lot of kids, but he had the potential. He was not fully developed, not fully grown out, and I think as he got into the program, put on some weight, that definitely helped, and they started to use him toward the end of last year. I can remember being a little bit surprised that he was getting into the games at the end of last year because they had some talent there last season, and he was just starting to get in there. And then this offseason, there were some whispers like, hey, this is probably going to be the guy. There was talk about Wyatt Hubert, who left and got taken to the NFL draft last year. That was a D end at K-State. He was saying, like, this is going to be the next guy. You need to watch out for him. And I'm just not sure any of us took it seriously enough until the middle of this year. Now, why he's having all the success he does, obviously he's got tons of talent, and he has an array of pass rushing moves. But I think the thing that really sets him apart in the way that he just absolutely terrorized TCU was that he is just relentless with his motor. Like, he just does not quit. He does not give up. If you think he's out of the play, he's going to keep pushing it, and he's going to find a way to get you on that second or third opportunity. And that is just what he did to TCU all day, a game in which he's only credited with 4 sacks. He had 6. 2 of them were forced fumbles, and they actually wound up being recovered by K-State. But since it was a turnover, the team stat would actually be credited to TCU as rushing yardage, so they would not count them as sacks. It was one of the more ridiculous NCAA rulings I've ever heard, but he should have tied the NCAA Division I record for single-game sacks with 6 against TCU, which is it was one of the most dominant performances I've ever seen.
You know, when I think of Deuce Vaughn, I think of more of a guy that is total offense. But this year he has 6 100-yard rushing games. He has a 99-yard rushing game against Iowa State in the loss. He obviously is a tremendous receiver out of the backfield, had 10 catches for 100 yards against Oklahoma. Is he even more a better runner than you thought, and not just what he does in the perimeter?
Yes, that I think is the key there, because you look at his size and you think about, being a small guy and kind of a scat back. Yep. And Chris Klieman has really pushed back against that and fought against that his entire career. Like this guy is more than that. Like he can carry the rock between the tackles, and he absolutely can. I mean, I hate to go back to the Darren Sproles comparison because everybody does it and it's obvious, but at a certain point it just makes sense, right? And it's not just because of the numbers he's putting up, but Darren was that same way too, where Sproles, he was in town the other day. What did he say? He squatted over 800 pounds when he was at K-State. I mean, the dude was a tank, and I don't know that Deuce is quite as sturdy and quite as thick, but he's certainly in the ballpark. Like that, he is not a small guy in terms of just girth and strength, and he really can. He can pound it between the tackles. Like he is an every down back. He can do anything that you ask of him, and he's just. I mean, I could not give you enough platitudes about just what kind of a kid that is, what kind of a football player that is. He's a coach's son. Obviously, his dad coached at Texas for a while. So he's just been really well-versed and well-trained into how to handle himself. I mean, he conducts himself as a professional right now in college. Knows exactly what to say in interviews. Just a genuinely tremendous human being, and just such a very K-State story. Guy that was pretty under-recruited growing up right in the shadow of Austin, Texas, and Round Rock. and wound up choosing K-State, and he has turned into an absolute star. And so you're right. He can run between the tackles. He can run it outside. He's a massive weapon in the passing game. And that's really become one of Skylar's favorite things to do is just, hey, instead of taking off and running, I can just dump it off to Deuce as my safety valve in the flat, let him pick up 5 or 6 yards, and that's essentially become an extension of K-State's running game here at this point in the year.
John, how much do you think special teams may come into play in the outcome of this game? Because I'm looking at these two teams, and I think, you got two solid defenses, obviously, two capable offenses, and Baylor's had some success on special teams. I know that K-State has as well, but they both had their misses. I'm just kind of feeling like that could be a tipping point in this game. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think there are a couple of things to watch out for as far as that goes on K-State's side of things. You think of special teams and K-State certainly likes to brand that, and it is true. They have multiple return touchdowns this year from Malik Knowles, who is, I think, a fairly average wide receiver, but with the ball in his hands, he's an elite athlete, and so he makes for a great returner because of that. He's also gotten himself into some trouble with fumbling a couple of returns, and they have all happened on he can get overzealous and try to take it out from 7 yards deep because he has that kind of confidence in him, but that has also resulted in disaster a couple of times for K-State in some really key spots this year. So they have been mistake prone, even as electrifying as they can be. Now they blocked a punt last week against West Virginia, which was the first time for a touchdown that had happened in 6 years. So they can certainly do that too, and they have some positives. But the thing I would really point to, if this is going to be a close game, K-State fans, I think, are going to be sweating any kind of field goal that comes for the Wildcats. So Tatum Winkle was the kicker for most of the year. Not a very heralded guy, but did a solid job. He kind of got beat out mid-season by Chris Tennant, who's another young kicker that they have right now that is the only guy on the roster because as soon as he beat out Tatum Winkle decided to just go back to being a regular student and not kick anymore. So if Chris Tennant, he's got a massive leg. They really love him and think he's going to be a star in the future. He's been very shaky as a young guy out there so far. He's missed a couple of chip shot field goals. He banged an extra point off the upright that still went in. But right now, it's a little tenuous when K-State lines up to go kick a field goal. And so that is something that I think I have had in mind as K-State approaches the last two games here against Baylor and Texas is, man, if you are in a tight spot, a game late, it just did not seem like Tennant looked very comfortable at all when he was kicking against West Virginia in largely a game that K-State was winning and winning fairly comfortably. So what happens when things really tighten up if it's a 3-point game against Baylor late? That's something to keep your eye on.
John, you've watched enough to know what Baylor has done. They had the really bad loss in Fort Worth. Obviously, Oklahoma State is a really good football team, and they lost that one by 10. Your thoughts when you've watched Baylor and what you've seen? Obviously, last year was a weird, strange year, and they weren't very good. But your thoughts on when you have had a chance to watch Baylor much at all this year?
I'm just wildly impressed. For Dave Aranda to inherit what he did last year, and I don't mean the program, but just the situation where you're a new head coach and you're coming into a COVID atmosphere and environment. I saw the havoc that wreaked on K-State, particularly when they had to go to a backup quarterback who was a freshman. I just can't even imagine what it's like as a head coach trying to implement things in your system under those circumstances. And to be able to turn it around as quickly as he did, one, I think is a testament to him, and two, is just a testament to the Baylor program, which now we're looking at, 3 straight head coaches here that have been able to win at like a Big 12 championship caliber level. So perhaps some of it is that the whole world or the Big 12 at large should not have forgotten that it was not that long ago that Matt Rule had this team and this program in the Big 12 championship game. But really impressed, man. I think Gary Bohannon is very solid. I like the word that you threw out there, capable. Certainly a very capable quarterback who can really hurt you. But the ground game has impressed me. It feels like I'm always watching Baylor rolling up chunk plays on the ground, which has really impressed me. And then that defense. It's funny to me. You mentioned Oklahoma State as well, like how much Oklahoma State and Baylor have been able to turn this narrative on its head of being these teams and programs that are about the spread offense, and it's just all skill talent and skill players. And that obviously is not the case at all anymore. It's just a different brand, a different identity. And I really enjoy it and like it. And Baylor's fun to watch. And to me, I know Mike Gundy is doing some great things in the Big 12, but it's hard for me to see Dave Aranda not being the Big 12 Coach of the Year based on just the turnaround from what he took over situationally last year and what last season was into what they've been this year.
All right, and what I mean by you and I, I'm talking about our show and your show with the Big 12, the big, knockdown, blindsided Texas-Oklahoma story at the end of the July, and then where the Big 12 has recovered. Have people in Manhattan calmed down now, and now that Bob Bowlesby has thrown the comeback story maybe of the year in the Big 12?
I think so for the most part. Yeah, I do. I think the only part of it that continues to really gnaw at K-State fans is just the attitude of their in-state rivals, with Kansas still having eyes for the Big Ten. And I haven't heard quite as much of that, it seems like, as the season has gone on. So maybe that is dying down some. But that had been the thing that's the constant annoyance, is looking to Kansas and the way that they've handled all of this and thinking that they're still bound for the Big Ten and that they're still above perhaps what the new look Big 12 is going to be. But I think everyone's been able to, for the most part, kind of hunker down, focus on the season. And for a while there, the season was not going very well. So all the focus turned toward, all right, what's happening with this program? I mean, there were fans after the 3-game losing streak. I'll just put it this way. I had to go dig up the details on Chris Kleiman's buyout and his contract because there were enough questions about that. And now obviously the tide has really turned on that. So there's just been enough happening throughout the season that I think it's diverted people's attention. And that's a testament to Bowlesby and what he's done, because that just shows the stability that is there relatively in the conference across the board right now, having added the 4 teams that they have. And I think everybody still looks and wonders and watches, certainly follows you guys in the reporting that you've been doing on this. What's the next step? Are there going to be a couple of other teams added? But that's a much different situation when you're kind of looking at it there as like it could be a bonus, an add-on. What are you going to add, as opposed to we've got to do something to survive.
Yep.
And Bob Bowlesby turned that around real quick. And so I think the attitude has pretty much reflected, kind of what the leadership has been like and what the situation of the league has been.
John, thank you, man. Great to have you on the show. Good to hear from you again. I know you've been popping with what you're doing with YouTube. Good luck with that, and also your work with K-State. John Kurtz with us, covers Kansas State, as you can tell, like a blanket, with us on 365 Radio. The last time they met, K-State led in Waco 17-6, dominating the offense at Baylor, which was 95% of the time was stuck in the mud. It was the last hurrah of Charlie Brewer. That's the game when Charlie went nuts and just basically started drawing things up in the turf. Ended up with over 300 yards passing, ran for 2 scores, and also threw for 349 and 2, and Baylor came back to win the game 32-31. That was his last big moment.
That was his parting gift.
Yeah. That was it.
Yeah, that was a close game. K-State very well should have won that game, and if not for that, then Baylor would have had their second 1-win season in 4 years.
Yeah.
But instead they got 2. They got 2 wins. They swept the Kansas schools last year. But yeah, that was a much needed win at the time, and just any win would have been great. But the style of that was something that you could kind of cling on to as a positive for Aranda when there weren't a whole lot of those in year number 1. So yeah, K-State's going to be a tough challenge again. Senior day, Skylar Thompson's last home game. Some really good weapons. I do think special teams, why I mentioned that, Malik Knowles in the return game, and the fact that their kicking game's a bit shaky, I could definitely see that coming into play. And, this should be a physical, nasty game, I would think, with a lot of just tough hits and great coaching. So I'm very much looking forward to this. I'm like J.J. Joe earlier. I'm all on Baylor on this game. I know the spread's moving down. I know there's a lot of reasons to point to Baylor and say, like, this could be an upset opportunity, and certainly they are on upset watch, but I just think head up, they're a better football team, just slightly than K-State is. But, some of those outside factors could come into play, so they have to make sure that they don't and find a way to bring the focus they've had at home onto the road, because that's the missing ingredient for them right now.
All right, when we